And without further ado, let's get started. So, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. My name is Pablo Marvel. I'm the head of business development for Sense. And joining me today is Jennifer Whitney. She is currently the vice president of business development at Eastern. She's been there for about 10 years. I'm not going to take up your whole introduction, but I just want you guys to know that Jen has been in the industry for uh, a, a considerable amount of time, such that I believe it's fair to say, you have seen everything and know everything there is to know about financing and lending in the industry. And, we're always learning, we're always seeing new things, but there's no one I'd rather be having this conversation with. And the topic we're covering today is financing 101 for laundromats, right? 101 and then financing plus for the veterans out there. But what we want you guys to take away from today is a really solid understanding of what to expect when going out for financing, what trends we're seeing in the industry right now, how that landscape has changed, and we'll have a lot of fun anecdotes and stories along the way. So while we jump in here, Jen, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and tell us how you got here today?
Okay, well, thank you first for having me. I really do appreciate it. And you make financing sound much more fun than I think that sometimes people put that label on it. It's not a real exciting topic to talk about, but yeah, I've been in the industry for about 25 years and started out at the manufacturer level, and really when the finance program was being put into place just to move metal. And it's evolved over time to kind of address the entire life cycle of a laundromat business. So before it was just equipment, now it's technology and ancillary equipment and acquisitions of existing stores, real estate. So it runs the gamut. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for taking the time to put this together. And let's get started.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think that's a great entry point. Financing has changed, right? Tell us right
Mhm.
now, in the great year of 2024, what would you say the state of financing in the laundry industry right now? Give us a little bit of that arc, the history of, how have you seen that progress? You said originally it was just to move metal and to help people progress, opening store after store. Right now, from your position, how has that changed in the 20 odd years that you've been in the industry, 25 years?
Yeah, I think it's more about helping laundry owners, investors figure out what their short-term and long-term goals are. It's not just transactions, it's about the what you want to do as an investor, as a store owner within the laundry industry, and how long do you want to be there? Is it just 5 years? Is it 10 years? Are you trying to put together a plan for your family where it's generational? So we, as a lender who understands laundry, I think it's more about understanding all the goals and how many stores you want to have and what you want to do within the industry. And you need to find a partner that can grow with you and evolve with you as you develop your business plan.
Absolutely. It's safe to say that it's become more of just a transactional relationship, right? And
Right.
so nowadays, I think one thing I imagine is on everyone's mind is the macroeconomic state of just lending in general. We're obviously dealing with different rate environments now than even a few years ago. That certainly changes people's outlook on the ability to deploy capital in the first place and how to approach that. So what would you say today, if someone's looking for a loan, what do they need to understand, when it comes to a laundromat from a perspective of what criteria they should be looking for, what the return profile is, like timeline wise? I mean, it's not the same rates it was even 2 years ago. So how has that changed the process and the outlook?
I think that you need to take your time, and do your research. I think jumping into an investment without understanding all of the potential costs associated with that investment, whether it's a new store, understanding the construction and the impact fees and the utility hookups. There's so much more on a new store development than there would be necessarily on an acquisition of an existing store, where you really should be thinking about, how much time are you going to be spending there? What personnel do you need? The marketing, what are the potential costs for replacing equipment in the future or today? So it's taking your time, doing your research, talking to the right people, and getting the right partners in place before you pull the trigger and make that investment. Because you are, in the industry over the last couple of years, we've seen that initial investment grow because the cost of construction, the cost of equipment has increased, and the cost of financing has increased. So you have to put all of the pieces together before you decide to move forward and get into business.
Absolutely. I mean, you and I chatted, we touch base on this periodically, but when we were talking about doing this webinar, we chatted about what the trends are showing just as far as building versus buying, or the requirements that go into each one of those. What are you seeing right now
Mhm.
as your customers approach you? Are they buying more? Are they still investing in building ground up? What Tell us about the supply and demand right now.
I think that they're buying more. We're seeing more acquisitions of existing stores because, there are a lot of stores in the market that maybe have not received the TLC that they've needed over the years, or the reinvestment over the years in new equipment. So there are opportunities out there, but I think that there's a lot of demand since COVID. A lot of people were looking online for industries to get into business for themselves. So people are looking for locations, and it really is coming down to the right fit, getting the right
Mhm,
investor with the right location for the right cash investment, and does it need new equipment now in the future? So
mhm,
more of a trend towards buying existing versus brand new, but just
mhm.
from a sheer cost element. So
So exactly, that's kind of where my mind was going. So, and by the way,
yeah.
for the crowd, part of what I'm doing is I'm trying to get inside Jennifer's head here, because when you guys are going out for a loan and you're thinking about your next acquisition, you're thinking about growing. I always think that it's important to understand what your potential is, and also what your potential is within the constraints and the criteria of what your lender is going to say to you, right? What are the questions that they're thinking, they being the lenders? Because
Mhm.
obviously, you can play in as big of a sandbox as you want, but we are in a sandbox given these macroeconomic constraints. So, Jen, when you're looking at someone who wants to buy versus build, like, what are the criteria that you're looking for, and how does your risk profile change? We're seeing a trend towards more people buying, right? But let's say I
Mhm.
came to you and said, I have the perfect site. I have an acre of dirt. I want to build the best laundromat and gas station combo, or a laundromat with a big enough parking lot that people can drive in from 20 miles away. What are you thinking of in those two situations, building versus buying?
It comes down to, it depends on, we have a lot of first timers on the webinar right now, right? So from a lender's perspective, we want to know that what is your plan? What's your plan for the store? So it's great if you have an existing laundromat that's 20 years old, it's been around, the customers know it, but what are you planning to do with it? How are you going to evolve with where the laundry industry is today? How are you planning to run it? What time are you committing to it? Do you need new equipment? What additional services are you going to offer that maybe haven't been offered in the past? And what's the plan for growing that business? And will you need cash or capital in order to do that? So it's really about how much cash do you have today, and what is your business plan, and will you have the ability to do that in the future, whether it's with our support, with finance support, or with your own cash. From a
Mhm,
new store perspective, I think it is not only the business plan, but it's also how are you planning to grow that business when there is competition around, or is there a threat of additional competition coming into the market that maybe you're not aware of now, but maybe the distributors are aware of, that are in that market. So from a new store perspective, competition, how long it takes for the construction. Do you have a general contractor that has the experience in building a laundromat, and how long is that process going to take? And does that work within your timeline and within the lender's timeline and the landlord's timeline, right? For getting into the location. So
Mhm.
that
That's really
project
interesting.
timeline is a big thing.
Project
Mhm.
time, right? So one key element, and by the way, Eric, I see your question here, and I think that's I love the specifics here. So I have one or two more questions, sort of at a high level strategic approach, and then I do want to drop into some maybe specific scenarios. So if anyone else
Mhm.
has current situations they're looking at or more specific questions around that, feel free to drop them in. We'll definitely circle back and try and get some of those questions answered. One thing, Jen, you mentioned that I think is really interesting is, and this is something you and I had chatted about before, is that the the lens that the lender looks at this with is no longer just what's the return. It's more, it's more used to be more formulaic. What's the return on this box with this many machines in
Mhm.
this demographic area? What I'm hearing you say
Mhm.
now is there's this other really important element, which is what is your growth plan, right? And I think it's fair to
Mhm.
say that in the industry, there have been a lot of new trends that have more or less changed the outlook on what it takes to run a laundromat. And we've seen this, the self-serve box with 50 or 70 machines in it that has maybe an attendant or maybe not, but that just runs itself. You go collect the coins or the cash, whatever. Like that's never going to go away to a certain degree because it works, but it works at a certain level. What we see
Mhm.
operators doing all the time is applying all these growth tactics that we see in other SMB industries. And that could be infusing, digital marketing. It could be all these add-on services. It's growth revenue opportunities. So what I'm hearing you say
Mhm.
is that you guys as lenders now look at what the growth business model is, and that will have a direct impact on the risk profile and potentially the rates and the amount of cash that an operator will have access to. Is that more or less what you're saying?
Yeah, yes, I think so. Yeah, I think a lot of times the first question that people ask us are, how much cash do I need to bring to the table? And, what would you finance for a specific location? And my answer is always, it's not cookie cutter, right? And I think maybe 10 to 20 years ago, it was more cookie cutter because it was more self-serve with a few with locations kind of sprinkling in wash, dry, fold, or drop off. Now you have so many different areas where you can add revenue to your location that we have to, as lenders, look at it on a case by case basis, right? And what investor variables do you have that, whether it's cash, personal net worth, any business ownership experience inside or outside of the laundry industry that will lend itself to a strong business plan for a laundromat. And
Yeah.
once, if you're looking at a second store or a third store, what have you built with your first store that can help you get into the second store?
Hmm.
So, there is value in an existing laundromat's cash flow. A lot of times, in the past, banks wouldn't even touch a
Right.
laundromat because it was an all cash business. Now with
Right.
technology, they're able to put together card system reports. So, you
Right.
can verify the revenues that are coming in. And so we're able to put a stronger value on the cash flow versus just looking at the value of the asset. So I think that
Interesting.
is a great benefit to laundromat owners who want to grow their portfolio and have a lender that grows with them.
Yep. And so two themes there that you're touching on, which I think are so important in the contemporary financing environment, which is number one, I think there's an interesting, I'd say, inverse parallel to an industry that probably a lot of people are familiar with, which is real estate, right? In the residential real estate environment, I part of my background at some point I worked in the residential real estate environment, and sort of the opposite things happening there, where the brokers or the, let's say, advisors or project partners are becoming less relevant thanks to companies like Zillow that are coming in commercializing the discovery process. Or I don't know if people are New York locals, we have Street Easy here, which is basically what all the brokers use. Street Easy is owned by Zillow. It's basically the same thing, just local to New York. when you
Mhm.
hire a residential broker, the first thing they do is pull up Street Easy, right? So the buyer, and frankly the seller too, but the buyer in real estate is empowered to do almost, they have almost exactly the same resources that a broker does. And it's the commission then is sort of how much do you want to pay someone else to do the heavy work? What you're
Mhm.
saying is actually the opposite, that as the laundry industry has evolved, you have to look at these loans more on a case by case basis because, and you know, this is something you and I talk about a lot, the modern lender, especially in the laundry industry, is actually more of a thought partner than a financier or just an access point to capital. You guys are looking at this, and there's so many more inputs to say, you know what, we can paint a much more colorful picture here of what the outcome of this could be. And I want to tie this into
Mhm.
the other thing you said, which is super important, is that nowadays operators have access to so many more tools, whether that's growth
Mhm.
tools, you know, in the tech front, or reporting. And, you know, of course, laundry is always going to be a cash heavy business. And I think people enjoy that. But
Mhm.
there's so many more things that can actually benefit someone looking for a loan because it is more factual. It's more immediate access to exactly how the performance is going for a certain laundromat or a
Mhm.
potential laundromat. And you also talked about track record, right? So if you've taken a loan before, if you've built a store before, that is, you know, where would you rank that on the list of factors of past performance? And, you know, keep in mind, we have a lot of first time potential,
Mhm.
you know, people looking for loans here. How can they contextualize their past business history if they're earlier in their journey here to leverage that?
As far as their past business history, like in previous industries,
Well, let's
or
say
what do
they don't
you?
have a lot. Let's say they don't have a laundromat to, you know,
Mhm.
show as far as track record. Like
Mhm.
how do they contextualize their experience?
Yeah, I think that if they're in a business of a business owner now, then what are the components of your business, right? What's your role in that business, and how does that, whether it's, you know, HR, customer service, marketing, um, or sales, really, you know, what skills do you have in your current work experience or in your current business ownership experience that would translate well into owning and operating a laundromat? So we see from new investors, we see a different levels of interest in wanting to operate the laundromat themselves versus being an investor and it being more of a quote unquote passive investment. You know, in my experience, I feel like, you know, laundry isn't a passive investment. You know, if the more you get involved in it in all aspects of it, the stronger the cash flow and the stronger the return is. You have to really um, be as excited about getting your hands dirty, I guess, and really digging in and getting to know your customer base and learning as much as you can in order to be as successful and get the largest return. So I want to hear someone who's excited, someone who's done their research, someone who, you know, has talked to their store owners in their market and outside of their market. What can you learn from other
Mm-hmm.
people that have been in this industry that you can take and kind of develop your own thing?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you know about your competition? How many stores are in the area? You should know anything and everything there is to know about the stores that you are going to compete against, how much they're charging for their vend prices, what services do they offer, how many
Mm.
attendants do they have, do those attendants wear uniforms, or do they present themselves professionally? How old is the equipment? You know, there's a lot that goes into it that I don't think that people take as much time thinking about versus, do I have enough cash just to get into it? You know,
Yeah.
there's more detail that needs to be considered, I think, than just the cash. Cash is great, and we need it,
Right.
right, to get you into the store. But then, how are you going to take what you know and develop that
Right.
in this business? Mhm.
So I think that's a really interesting point, and I'm going to tie this into a question in the chat from Amir, which is basically you guys, it's not just a lender role. This is more of I don't want to say investment approach, but in some ways, what I'm hearing you say is that you are investing in the operator as well as the
Mhm.
business, right? Obviously, there's varying levels of personal investment people are going to make, whether that's time or capital intensive, and that's fine,
Mhm.
right? But it sounds like a factor is how much are you invested in this, and maybe that
Mhm.
will adjust the profile of the opportunity. The question that I want to touch on here from Amer is, as a lender, do you provide any advisory services to an investor who's new to the industry? Specifically, how will you evaluate a space in New York City for a first-time laundry owner? What should the investor look for? And so everything you're saying now in the context of the question is, let's say someone comes to you or any lender, right? And by the way, for the record, this is not Sense and Eastern talking. This is you know laundromat
Yeah.
industry observers in the context of finance, right? So it could be your own lender, could be Eastern, but if someone comes to you and they don't have a space and they say, hey, I want to get involved, or maybe they have one or two options they're looking at, where in their journey do you start with them, and how does that relationship look like?
Yeah, we start with the first phone call, right? So it can go one of two ways. We can look at you as an investor, similar to what a bank would do if you were buying a new home. You want to get pre-approved for a certain amount to know what you're shopping for, what you have the financial backing for. So that's one approach. The other approach is to analyze the location, and it's really in partnership with a local equipment distributor. So I always tell people that if they're looking at an existing store that has an existing brand of equipment, right, then you go to that equipment distributor and you get their input on that location. And because they know the history, they know how old the equipment is, they know how much it's been serviced, they can provide you more detail on that specific space than anybody else in the market. And then we look at the numbers, right? So if you're looking to buy an existing location, you get the financials. And from a lender's perspective, we want to know that that the value is there and that the cash flow of that store can support the debt. So I think that would be the next step that I would recommend, is having another set of eyes on the numbers before you make a decision on making an offer on the store, because you want to make sure that any lender that is there to support you is going to support you at the level that you need. And we're looking from a buyer's perspective versus a seller's perspective, right? We're not the broker. We're not trying to make that sale. We're trying to make sure that the investor fits the location that they're buying financially. So it can go either way, pre-approval as an investor or pre-approval on the location.
Right. So a good lender will meet the investor in their journey, right? And I think it's important to also address the other side of this, which is, what are situations where you will not approve someone, right? Or not necessarily you, but what are situations that people need to avoid so that they can get approval? Because at the end of the day, not every opportunity is a good one. Not every investor is ready for that kind of responsibility. So what are downside scenarios that you guys, as lenders who have the experience that you do, what are opportunities that you guys try and avoid?
Yeah, the what we want to see, I think, the most important thing is you're buying off of actual versus off of the potential of the store when you're looking
Mm,
at an existing location. So a lot of sellers right now, because there's so much demand to get into the laundry industry, some sellers think that they can sell at a higher multiple or a higher price than where there is value. So you buy off of actual, and then you talk about and you analyze what is the potential for the store that you can bring to the table. We don't want to finance off of potential unless you're replacing equipment, right? So the first thing is buy off of actual, not potential. Second is you have to look at the age of the equipment and what your potential cost is going to be to replace that equipment. And you want to make sure that if you are buying at X price, but you have another $200,000 in equipment that needs to be purchased, can that store support the level of debt that you're going to have if you have to finance the purchase and if you have to finance the new equipment? Because
Hmm.
we look at both pieces. And,
Hmm.
you know, what we want to see is that, as it is today, it can support the acquisition, but as it will be tomorrow, it needs to be able to support both the acquisition and the new equipment.
I think that's such a poignant point. One thing I want to add that I've heard, or that I heard once and it stuck with me, is the lease term, right? I mean, I think
Mhm.
I've heard horror stories about people missing this one small but very mighty detail of when the lease term is up. Because at the end of the day, the same laundromat with a 20 years left on its lease and 3 years left on its lease is the value cut, you know, cut and cut down to pieces. I mean, tell us about how the longevity of a lease will affect the outcome there, and generally the role of a landlord in a deal.
Yeah, so the lease is, you're right, that's the last one of the other variables that we look at when we're looking at the value of a store is the lease. So the longer the lease term, the more ability you have to replace equipment or to potentially have an exit strategy for selling the store. Because it makes it more attractive to buyers if there is a long enough lease and they don't have to go back and negotiate with a landlord for additional renewal options. Everything is in place. So if you have a store that's has 15-year-old equipment and it has 5 years left on the lease, that is going to have less value in our minds than if you had a 15 years left on the lease and 5-year-old equipment. So we may look at the store with older equipment and only value it at a multiple of 3 times annual cash flow. If you have a stronger lease, newer equipment, then that could be a higher multiple, a 4 multiple, or a 5 multiple of annual cash flow. So there are a lot of variables that go into it. What I would recommend is that if you're looking at a new lease, a brand new lease, and you're negotiating with a landlord, do not sign that lease unless and until you have a lender that has looked at it and has a landlord document that's signed. Um, because most lenders, if not all lenders, would require a landlord to sign
Hmm.
a lender agreement in
Yep.
order to provide financing for a purchase or for new equipment.
Yep. And Amr also asked another question here, which I want to say, don't sign a lease without without a lender looking at it, but also make sure you talk to the landlord before you take a loan, right? Because I've heard horror stories. One in
Right.
particular, a friend of mine was telling me, a friend of his basically signed, bought a place, and it was, probably I want to say six or $700,000 invested, and then realized that the lease was up in 18 months or something, and the landlord was not going to renew the lease, and they wanted to absorb the laundromat themselves in the building, and there was absolutely nothing
Mhm.
he could do about it. So he was out call it 600 grand, simply because he
Mhm.
did not think to, and it's not even that he wasn't sophisticated about it. It's just they didn't get the landlord involved. They didn't have the chance to understand that landlord's interest or potentially negotiate with them. He invested the capital,
Mhm.
signed all the documents, the asset transferred hands, and then he had a very rude awakening. So there's things like that. I would
Mhm.
also say permitting probably is a part of it. I mean, maybe less
Mhm.
upfront, but understanding what you're able to do if you're doing any renovations or doing a ground up development. Also, I saw that Robert Harris asked, "Are you seeing a trend towards building new or acquiring?" And Jen had mentioned that we're seeing a lot more acquiring existing stores. I'm sure it still does happen, a decent amount that people are building, but just given the rate environment and also the multiples that I think people are getting on laundromats right now, there's still a great opportunity to buy and renew as we see this sort of generational turnover of ownership. So
Right.
let's get a little more technical here. I saw that Eric let's see. Okay, sorry. Just while we're on the topic, Amir is asking, regardless of the terms, no matter how favorable, what happens to the business if the lease is not renewed? Jen, you want to speak to
If
yeah, what's the worst case scenario? The landlord refuses to renew the lease and you are operating a laundromat. What happens?
and you already have a loan or you don't have a loan in place yet.
I think assuming you've gone far enough in the process. I mean, the answer, Amir, is it's not good news, right? But what I guess uh how would you navigate that situation in various instances?
Honestly, I if you're buying an existing store and a landlord is not willing to discuss a renewal option or renewing, I'm not sure I would recommend that you move forward with it. And
Big
we've
red
told
flag.
people to walk away from locations because of that. Unless because the thing is, if you're struggling with a landlord on the front end of it, just imagine if something were to happen, anything were to happen with the infrastructure of the space, or if you just needed help navigating, people and other tenants that are in the center. There are just so many other things that can happen during the life of your business if the landlord's not your partner, just like a lender, just like a distributor, just like anybody else that is involved in a laundry investment, then is that really, are they really looking out for your best interest or are they in it for themselves? And I would shy away from working with anyone who didn't have my best interest and want me to succeed just as much as they're succeeding.
Guys, trust the lender that tells you to walk away from a deal. That is a good partner right there. But
Mhm.
it's true. There are a lot of nuances to this, and that is I'm glad we're getting into this subject matter here because there's a lot of considerations that are not just the finances and the economics of the box itself. It's not just the business model. There are so many other soft factors that hopefully people do not learn from experience that we can get ahead of that and say talk to your
Mhm.
landlord, make sure you have as many fractional business partners as you can. So I want to get a little more technical here. Eric put in a good question here, which is um, what else beyond just a direct loan, right? And when we look at a lot of factors here, what else can operators leverage? And he's saying, are you converting 401s? Are you looking at rollovers? How are you helping them from a strategic standpoint beyond just here's your sort of net worth, your bank account, your business model? How
Mhm.
tactical can we get here when looking at deals?
You from a cash perspective, so the cash investment piece of it, whether you have to come in with 30% or 50% cash, depending on the transaction, right? That 30 to 50% can come from a bunch of different forms. It can be cash from yourself, it can be some of your cashing out investments. We have worked with people who have done like the ROBS program where they're pulling from their 401k. There are different requirements from each. What I typically tell people is that of that 30 to 50% cash investment, we want to see that at least half of that cash investment comes from you personally. That you have skin in the game. We want to see that you're invested. You've saved money to get into business. The other half can be a little bit more creative. So whether that comes from the 401k, or if it comes from pulling equity from an existing laundromat, leveraging the asset that you have with your first laundromat to get into your second laundromat. We can be a little bit more creative there once you have your first store under your belt. Um, but I will say that cash reserves right now in this climate are most important. They're most important because we want to see, and lenders, regardless of who you go through, whether it's the SBA, a private lender, a bank, Eastern Funding, or a captive, a manufacturer-based lender, we
Hmm.
they want to see that you have the cash to weather any potential storm that comes up like COVID. I mean, that was shocking what happened during COVID, right? So now we're all trying to think about, creative ways to come up with cash, but you also want to have those reserves available in the event that something were to happen, an emergency fund. So we
Hmm.
don't necessarily get involved in advising people on whether or not they should pull money from a 401k. We recommend you talk to your investment advisor, an accountant, an attorney. Talk about how that all affects your personal and professional financial condition. So,
Hmm. So let's address the other side of this, right? We have a lot of people who are very early stage here and early in their journey, but I also want to speak to the veterans out there, right? Like when someone comes into your
mhm,
office and says, "Hey Jen, we've done 10 deals together," right? Is it
mhm,
just run of the mill? We know each other. We got this down pat. Here's, you're pre-approved for a certain amount, or we trust you, or like how do you work with people who maybe have done this so many times they think they know everything about it, not in a presumptuous way, right? But
mhm.
how do you keep ahead of, the changing environments, or how do you work with your veterans?
I think that there's, with veterans, with people who we've worked with before, it's comfortable, right? You can have those open, honest conversations, and they understand why we require the paperwork we require. They kind of put up with that red tape, that some people may not necessarily love, but it's a necessary evil. Um, but that conversation is a little deeper because how can you leverage what you have in your existing portfolio and get you to accomplish what you need to do 2 years down the road, 2 months down the road, or 10 years down the road. So it really is tailored to what they are trying to accomplish with their portfolio of laundromats. And like I said, I mean, we can be more creative. The more stores you have, the more um, borrowing capability you have, but you also have access to more cash as well. So it's just finding what that balance is for the comfort level of that particular investor. Because some people don't love debt and some people want to
Hmm.
use it as much as they can to their benefit. So,
Got it. Okay, so I'm going to ask you for digging through the archives here. I'm sure you've seen everything there is to see. What is the craziest thing that someone has tried to come to you with for collateral, or saying, Jen, I've got this, right? Is it my art collection? Is it my kid's car that I just bought for them? What have you seen that
mhm.
maybe shows how broadly people can try and get something financed?
They'll offer up everything. I mean, what you just said, or commercial real estate, residential real estate. I have a condo in Florida. We try to stay
Just
away from
don't tell my
anything.
partner, but take our house.
Yeah, yeah. So we don't want that. We don't, and that's the difference, right? I mean, sometimes with the SBA, depending on which vehicle you use, they want to take anything and everything as collateral. We don't necessarily want to do that, especially on the personal side of things. We don't want your home, and we don't want to get involved in that. So I don't know. I think really it's just been real estate. I don't know if I've had anything really crazy that people have offered up to me other than properties. So it's
Hmm.
not too.
Okay, well, good. I'm, off the record. Don't tell anyone here, but I'll put up the Sense office for collateral. I saw this opportunity. I just absolutely have to have it.
Yeah.
But I saw that Matt Westphal, one of your colleagues in the chat. Matt, I'm sure you've seen and heard all kinds of things. Feel free to drop in the comments. I saw you said highly recommend you have an attorney review lease. I think that's such a good point as well. Any
Mhm.
nuggets of wisdom, Matt, feel free to drop them in the comments here. So Andrea brought up an interesting point that I wanted to get to, which is and Charlie, that's exactly my next question too. So we'll get to that in a second. But Andrea says, I'm searching for an acquisition. Is there a pre-approval process like there is when buying real estate? And
Mhm.
the concern is I'm concerned I'll be beat out by another buyer with all cash offer, right? So there's a little bit of a question around timing, pre-approval,
Mhm.
and the other question on my mind is how do you compete with cash?
Yeah, that's definitely more challenging. With the first question, um, how do you what do we look at for as far as a pre-approval is concerned? So we're looking at credit score, personal net worth, and cash. Those three things. That gets you a pre-approval up to a certain dollar amount. So we're looking at how much cash do you have, and we want to make sure that we don't drain all that cash. We take just enough to get you into the store, but then leave you with some reserves. So, if something needs to be repaired or fixed or replaced, then you have the cash for it. That's what I would recommend for pre-approval. I It's hard to compete with cash. I mean, right now, if someone comes in with a cash offer and for somebody and it is their asking price, they're going to take it. They're going to take it all day long. And unfortunately, that's been a struggle. So a lot of
A
the
tale as
the
old as time.
Yeah, a lot of the solid stores that are selling at a reasonable multiple, or if there's a great opportunity in a certain market, some multi-store owners are coming in and offering the cash because they have that capability. So that's a more challenging question that I'm not sure I have the best answer for.
I'm not sure
So,
anyone has the best answer for that. I mean, but
yeah.
it is competitive out there. I know we talked about this the other day, but um, you
Mhm.
know, and Veronica, yes, credit score, personal net worth, and cash was the last one that she had said. But it's a really competitive environment out there. I know that there is so much more demand out there than there is supply right now, which frankly is great for sellers, right? I mean, we're talking
Mhm.
about an environment right now where multiples are probably trending a little higher than they have historically. Can you tell us a little bit about the multiples you're saying? I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to focus in on,
Mhm.
from the seller perspective, um, what are we seeing for what you can get for a laundromat these days?
Yeah, it depends on the market, right? Because we're seeing stores being sold at a higher multiple in some markets, in Florida, in Texas, in California, in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey. Some are garnering a higher multiple. From a lender's perspective, generally speaking, we value stores at a multiple of annual cash flow. So it could be anywhere from 2 up to 5. And it's a large spread. But the factors that affect what multiple you use, it's the age of the equipment, the lease that we talked about, as long if you have a strong lease, and what the monthly gross revenues are, and what the rent is as a percentage of the gross revenues. Are you getting the value for what you're paying? So it could be, like I said, anywhere from 2 to 5. And then typically lenders will lend up to, anywhere from 50 to 70% of that value or the asking price, whichever is less. So again, I
Got it.
know that that's a lot, it's a big range, but there are so many factors, what if scenarios that can change what that multiple is, whether it's, highly self-serve versus a combination of self-serve and drop off, or
Right.
self-serve drop off, pickup and delivery. We're trying to adjust as the industry is evolving. So from our point of view as a lender, we're going to be more conservative in the valuation than where the multiples are at. So sometimes in California and in Florida, we're seeing 5.5, some 6. But again, you pay off of actual, not potential.
Right.
So
And that multiple to, let's say, 2 to 5, depending on these factors in the market, that's on top line cash flow. That's not on EBITDA, right? Net income.
no, that's 2 to 5 on annual cash flow net, the EBITDA
Oh,
number
net. Okay.
before debt service.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Good. Okay, good to
Yep.
clarify. Yeah. So take home cash. Okay, great. And I think, the other good question I saw in here, just from a practical standpoint, how can you leverage a laundromat that I own to buy another, right? So I know you've described the factors we look at here, but is there a multiplier on an existing asset that you can collateralize? Is there an experience
Mhm.
factor? Like, let's say my net worth and general cash is, of the factors you described, those are a little bit lower, but I have a really great laundromat business. How does that factor into my next purchase?
Yeah, so the same multiples hold true if you want to borrow against your or leverage your laundromat to get into the next one. The same multiples hold true. So the 2 to 5 times annual EBITDA or annual net cash flow. I think that what is important to understand is as your relationship with your lender grows, the more flexibility you have to negotiate on what that 50 to 70% loan to value number is. So if it's the first time that you leverage your existing store, it may be 60% loan to value versus the second time as you build a rapport, a relationship, a good payment history, then you may go up to 65 or 70% of that value towards the next store. So it just depends. Again, it's not cookie cutter, and I hate to say that that it's a case by case basis, but that's where it's really important for you and your lender to really get to know each other, and you can share information back and forth, and we get to know your location, your cash flow, and that just, again, we can be more flexible and more creative as you continue to add locations to your portfolio.
So let's talk about that relationship, right? Because a lot of this is trust, and I want to call out something I've seen entrepreneurs, and whether it's in laundry or other, but it's a human mistake. I want to call out the importance of good record keeping, because
Mhm,
you've talked about a number of really important things: buying off of the actual, not potential, right? Looking at your past
mhm,
track record, looking at the actual asset itself, the cash flow, the performance, the growth performance. So I want to highlight the importance of good record keeping from day one. It can be one of the most exciting
mhm,
experiences to buy a laundromat, especially your first one, or to grow your business, your portfolio from 1 to 2 to 5 to 20, whatever. And as you
mhm,
expand, just like with anything, your problems can scale with your operation. Now, I think that
mhm,
nowadays, and this is one of the first things we talked about, the game has changed such that operators have so many more tools at their disposal, right? And so one of the
mhm,
most important tools to use is tools that cover every aspect of your business model, that have good and clear reporting, not just, by the way, not just for
mhm,
your next loan, but for your day-to-day operations, right? But
mhm,
those same tool sets can include growth potential that you've said this is going to dramatically actually improve your ability to the ease of how you can get your next loan, and also the actual loan amount, right? So
mhm,
with that in mind, understanding how to use capital also, I think, includes understanding how to use a toolkit and a operating system, because at the end of the day, the
mhm,
game has changed, so to speak. Right, the laundromat is no longer just the mom and pop lifestyle business. Right, these are super opportunities. These are real growth potentials. And so, tell us a little bit in your experience, like the persona of person that you're seeing coming to ask you for a loan, right? Like, what are the different profiles, and how would you categorize, people who are looking for loans these days?
Yeah, I think we said at the beginning, I think that people are taking more time to analyze the data. And you mentioned record keeping, from the get-go. If I were a buyer and I went to look at a store's financials and I saw someone who was handwriting a ledger still, and counting quarters and counting cash, and it was kind of a hit or miss um, with the managing the revenues and expenses, or at least record keeping. I would probably question more what those revenues, the validity of those numbers, if it looked like that versus someone printing off card system reports or POS system reports that could verify the cash that went through the location. Um, it's really important for buyers to be able to trust the numbers because they're putting out so much money to buy that store. And the better the records are, the better, the more information you can provide, the stronger the credibility is for your store and you as a seller or as a business owner, from a
Mhm.
lender's perspective or a buyer's perspective. So I think that you're right. It has changed, and it's not just about record keeping. It's also about managing your business and how do you scale that business as you grow. And you can't, when we first started, it was people getting in a car and driving around to 5 locations on Mondays and Wednesdays or Mondays and Fridays to collect their quarters, right? And go to the bank and, deposit everything. And now it's about people, looking at their locations remotely through cameras and watching their customers coming in and out and really being able to help their customers, and customer service. There's just so many things. I think we could talk for another hour, but just from a numbers perspective, I think it's really
Mhm.
important to evolve with the technology, because now with the technology that you have on the machines, you can track by machine what you're doing. What prices, when are people coming in? Can you offer promotions? Um, Utilize that technology to your benefit and
Yeah.
grow your bottom line. That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. When I speak with people in the industry, especially, distributors, people have been doing this for a long time. People have that 10,000-foot view on the industry. They often say, hey, I could walk into a store and count the number of washes in there and look how many cars on the parking lot, and I can back into their P&L within 5%. Right.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
that there's truth to that to a certain degree, which is a plus for the industry, that it is formulaic to a certain degree, right? There is a process here. There's a lot of trust in, just the fact that it's probably one of the most recession proof industries of all time, right? People, hopefully, we're not moving towards nudist colonies anytime soon, maybe. But
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of reliability in this. That said, with the changing business models, there's so much more you can do and so much more data available. And we see,
Hmm.
even on a manufacturing level, the washers and dryers themselves are able to produce so much more data about what's going on.
Hmm.
You have really, really cool features coming from manufacturers about water saving and cutting cycles short if they sense a certain moisture in there, or humidity sensors and dryers and things like that. So really, laundry is pulling ahead from a technology perspective, and there's so much more
Hmm.
potential. There's so much more potential available. I think financing is the vehicle to growth for any industry, but especially in laundry. There's so much more potential at people's fingertips here. I do want to call out. We
Hmm.
have just a few minutes left, so any other questions you guys have, drop them in. We can try and get to those. Veronica says, "Do we need a pro forma or a business plan to apply for funding to purchase an existing laundromat?" I know we had touched on this a little bit, Jen, but if you want to give one quick comment to that.
Yeah, we always say as is and as will be, right? So yes, you need to have a business plan, and we need to have cash flow from the seller as well as projections for the buyer, and what does the store look like under your ownership? So we take the actual financials from the seller and kind of back into what the average turns per day are at that location today. And then we look at what your business model is going to be. And if you're going to replace equipment, are you going to increase spend prices? Are you going to reduce expenses? Or are you going to add revenue segments? So we look at it as it is today and as it will be under your ownership to evaluate what we can do for financing for you.
Wonderful. Well, look, it's 4 o'clock on the nose. Jen, you told me the other day that finance people are accounting people with personalities. I think that is true 10 times over for you, but this has been so wonderful. And thank you very much to everyone who came. I hope this was informative. There's so many good resources that Eastern has on their website, that Sense has written about in blog posts. But in general, I hope that the big takeaways here is that your lending partner is more than just access to capital. They are thought partners, they are business partners, and they're here to help you make the right decision, not just the next decision. So go talk to your lender, folks. And thank you very much for joining. I hope this was really helpful for everyone. And Jen, I'll see you soon.
Okay, sounds good, Pablo. Thanks so much. Appreciate
No
it.
problem. See you everyone later.